Hi, last but not least, the NGO, the frontline worker on the ground, and thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to start by taking you with me to a situation that happens today, not 20 years ago when I got involved with refugee work. And that is a situation of sitting with a person who is in dire straits, who's looking for help, looking quite desperately for help. Now, why would that person be sitting with me? Well, we do refugee sponsorship. And what does that mean? That means that we provide, under the private sponsorship program, 1 year of financial assistance and everything related to newcomers who are selected as refugees to come to Canada. It's helping them learn everything about Canadian life. So word gets around, word's out there. And it would be unlikely that I would be with a domestically trafficked person. This is probably someone who has crossed the border. Now, I have in front of me, or with me, this person. What would you do? And that's the question I'm putting out there. I scan my mind, and I know, and I should add, by the way, that private sponsorship of refugees program resettles approximately 3,000 a year. At its peak, it resettled 30,000 with the Vietnam crisis. During the Bosnian crisis, it resettled about 10,000. So we're 3,000 now. We do a good job. And I scan in my mind, what can I do to help this person? And as I listen to the story, I detect that there are words missing from the story. So I know that there's nothing in our legislation that addresses the protection of trafficked persons. I know also that there are laws criminalizing trafficking in our criminal code and our IRPA, but nothing that is going to ensure the protection of this person. We do have the TRP, the temporary resident permit. However, that comes with a phrase that says mandatory and obligatory and immediate interview with enforcement. And I think that if I put this option to this person sitting with me, I'd probably never see them again. We know that these are just guidelines, the TRP, that it's discretionary. And we've been told by our friends who work as duty counsel that they most often encounter trafficked persons in detention. In other words, what happens is that the trafficked persons are picked up on a minor offense, overstaying a visitor's permit, or not having a working permit and working, or maybe not having a passport, and they're detained and they're sent home, often before they can meet with a lawyer, or by the time duty counsel gets there, it's too late. The CBSA, which is the organization that these people are most likely to surface within, has that jurisdiction to issue a removal order. Once that happens, it's almost impossible to do anything. So what am I going to do about this person? We know that the attitude which comes down through our criminal legislation, which exists to prosecute traffickers, we know that that attitude of criminalization persists and permeates the whole trafficking business. We know that there is not much of a positive attitude within our enforcement bodies to help or assist, or in fact, CBSA in issuing a removal order is actually just doing their job. They're in the business of removals. They're not in the business of assessing traffic, the needs and the trauma that these people may have experienced. So I don't want to run CBSA into the ground. That's their job. Hence, trafficking in Canada tends to be put into the criminal camp, and victims are criminalized along with the traffickers. And we know that this criminal approach has eclipsed the fact that human trafficking is also an immigration issue, a human rights issue, and a gender issue. And one last thing we know is that the person sitting with me is not obligated to report crime. Our Supreme Court of Canada has said there is no obligation on anyone in Canada ever to report a crime. There's no obligation. What shall I do? What would you do? And that brings me to the Canadian Council of Refugees, and it's very fitting to mention the CCR today because they've done a tremendous job at defending human rights, particularly refugee rights. And I guess back in the 90s, the CCR is an organization of about 180 groups in Canada. And back in the 90s, we perceived that some of our member organizations were being approached by people who most likely had been trafficked, seeking assistance. But our organizations were not prepared. We really didn't know what to do. So we started to have workshops. And in 2003, we held 10 workshops across the country. And out of those workshops, we produced a report. And in that report, there are 6 principles that were distilled from this grassroots input right across the country. And those 6 principles are: 1, that measures to protect trafficked persons must not penalize them, must be non-punitive. The measures to assist them and protect them must be guided by and respectful of the human rights of trafficked persons, their economic rights. 3rd one, measures must be guided by the economic rights of trafficked persons. Supportive services must be put in place. There must be a gender and race analysis, and these measures must be inclusive of the trafficked persons themselves. We continue to hold workshops. In fact, there have been some wonderful educative and conscious-raising workshops here in Vancouver. And in 2003, we sat down and said, okay, nothing's happening. And we put together a legislative amendment proposal. And I urge you to pick this up and read it and take it with you. There are plenty of copies. And I'd like to read you the rationale from our proposal. The purpose is to advocate for legislative changes that will lead to a permanent and fundamental change in policy so that trafficked persons in Canada are protected. Currently, the only provision in Canadian law relating to trafficked persons serve to criminalize trafficking and promote the detention of trafficked persons. There is nothing in our legislation to protect trafficked persons and their rights. The TRP, Temporary Resident Permit, is of limited usefulness. In particular, these guidelines impose an unreasonable burden of proof on the trafficked person to convince an immigration officer that he or she is indeed a victim of trafficking. Furthermore, the mandatory involvement of law enforcement agencies deters trafficked persons from applying because of concerns about the potential consequences of such involvement. While the primary purpose of our proposal is to protect trafficked persons, it would also serve broader anti-trafficking objectives. Finally, our proposal serves the goal of promoting gender equality given the gendered aspects of trafficking, which differentially impacts women and girls, exploiting their vulnerability within society, both in Canada and around the world. There are 10 points. I'm not going to go through all of them. I leave it to you to read them. And once again, the person sitting with me, what would you do? I want to leave you with these words taken from the South Asian Court of Women on Trafficking and HIV/AIDS. The title to the 20th court was Casting Curious Shadows in the Dark. Before this night is over, and before this new dawn rises, maybe we can sit here in the shade and talk, not afraid to question the dent in the dream or the words missing from the story. I have no definite tomorrow, only a longing that I will speak to pick out lights that cast curious shadows in the dark. That's a poem by Jackie Kay. And in conclusion, there is no legislation that assures the protection of trafficked persons, and until that happens, we're not going to move ahead, and we're not going to be successful in bringing trafficking out of the shadows.